could everyone pop in the chat? Julia's already ahead of us here. Good morning from Sydney. Could you tell us where you're coming from? I know we've got at least two from Arizona. We've got Chicago, brilliant. Upper Hutt, excellent in Wellington. That's brilliant. Hello, Joe. We've got Seattle, Alton, Northwest England, Maine. I've never been to Maine, but I must. Brisbane, Edinburgh, Brussels, Scotland. Bruce, hello, Bruce. Bruce is the hero of the story here. We have got Wellington, we've got Scotland, we've got Chicago again. Hello, Nelson. We've got Auckland. Hello, Lita, one of my the people that's known me longer probably than anyone else on this call. We've got Indianapolis. Cool. We've got Cambridge, New Zealand. We've got another Edinburgh. We've got Wellington and Bora Bora. But physically in Princeton. Okay, Richard, that makes really good sense. Excellent. Okay, now I've got five more people coming in and they can play catch up in just a moment. And I even have some slides. Graham, would you mind if I made you co-host so that you can admit people in? Cool. You can also, I think, kick me out if you get bored with me. So um, it raises the stakes a little bit. Right. Now I'm going to share. Isn't it funny? At the moment, I'm conscious that I'm talking too much. And yet, I suppose at the same time, that's probably what I'm supposed to do. Now, I've suddenly lost all of you. There we go. We're back. Can I just get a thumbs up that you can see a little list of words? Excellent. Okay, that's really cool. Right, so I sat down yesterday and I come up with all of these things that I wanted to share, and then I popped them into ChatGTP and it organizes them into a nice little thing here. And I just got this little app. It took me half an hour to realize that I didn't have the skills to cut and paste these things into Keynote. So I'm just going to run through these, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unfold these as I go. So it should be pretty straightforward. Right, so. This is the useful things that I've learned in the last 20 years because I wrote this book. Some of these things are going to be quite different to probably what you expect. Some of them are going to be about writing books and being creative. Some of them are going to be about delivering software projects. Some of them are going to be about agile. And we'll find out what the rest are about as we go. And I'm gonna, you all know me, I guess, as the bottleneck guy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have signed in. And now I just want to, before if you've read Rolling Rocks Downhill, it started off with bacon, and then it ended with bacon. So it's like the beginning and the end. It started with bacon and it ended with bacon. And actually, if you ever want to go back and see probably one of my proudest moments in writing, it's the first paragraph in the book. It's like I think it was I love the smell of jet lag in the morning. And then it carries on and it sort of talks about bacon and the breakfast. And the reason I love it is purely as an author. One of the lessons I've learned is that I know people like reading my books and stuff, but I'm not a very skilled writer. So that was the most sophisticated sentence in the whole book. It was probably the longest sentence, and it was one that I spent so many hours just trying to get it so that it was just right. And when you all read it, it was gone in a moment. But it did set up the entire story to flow from that. And it went from bacon at the beginning and bacon at the end. And I'm going to come back, and I'm just mentioning the bacon because it's actually sort of pertinent. But the bacon isn't, but the beginning and ending of it is pertinent to what comes next. So bacon, right now. The cleverest and the stupidest thing I think I've done in my life was to decide to write a business novel because seriously, it is so hard to do. And I've had several of you on the call here were part of that journey, especially Bruce, who's sitting up there with a lovely sea view in the background. Uh, it's a really, really, really hard thing to write a book. Um, Especially if you just sit down and try and write it. So what you've got to do when you write a book is you've got to read lots of books about writing a books. Um, and it's almost like if anyone here might consider themselves to be a productivity expert, just have a think of how much time you spend thinking about being productive versus being actually productive and doing stuff. It's a really, really hard undertaking. And one of the things that you learn as you go is like the thing I learned probably halfway through writing this is that I'm not a very sophisticated writer. So that's why that first paragraph took so much effort. But the rest of the book, I made it work by doing two main things. One is that it turns out that there are structures and architectures that go with good books and good movies and good stories. And they all kind of follow the same pattern. And if you've read about this stuff, you'll know about things like the three-act structure. For instance, but the three-act structure also makes it really complicated. And I just want to so that's one thing. So the architecture is one thing. And the second bit that I did was that I made sure that I wrote within my ability, which meant that it was short sentences, uh, short chapters with a little hook often at the end of it that made you want to read to the next one. And I just really simplified things down so that I could write within my ability. And if that's not, I'm not doing this just to go, oh, look how clever I am. I dumb things down so that I could write a book. It's a really, really useful thing if you think about all the work we do. So much of the stuff that people like us do is we just try and simplify things so that they're actually achievable. So I'm never going to write a big book with complicated sentences and it be because it's beyond me. I can't even read those books anymore. But dumbing it down or simplifying it up might be a nicer way of thinking of it, is a massively useful technique for everyone else as well as yourself. So now the three-act structure is it's actually a really stupid name because it should be either the two half or the four-quarter structure. And you'll find that you can you can go and get a good commercial movie that you've really enjoyed, and you can find where the midpoint of the movie is. And you can go to it, and what you'll find is that in the midpoint, it's like the first half of the movie will go up a hill, it will reach the top of the hill, and then something significant will happen, and then the second half will start. So this is a really, really interesting structure because it works in books and it actually works in real life as well. So if I take the books, the midpoint is usually something where a light bulb comes on or something big happens. I remember the movie, was it Captain Phillips about the pirates that took over a ship? In the midpoint, if you move to it, suddenly you I think you hear this big noise, and it's the sound of the Navy, the U.S. Navy, turning up at the ship. And then suddenly, when the big warship arrives, the whole story changes. In Rolling Rocks Downhill, um, people who remember when the book came out will remember the line, "Don't think of small batches." Um, the the pivot point in the Rolling Rocks Downhill, the thing that happened at the top of the hill when it suddenly changed direction, was when Steve had stopped thinking about small batches and he realized that the way to deliver big projects on time was to build them incrementally in small batches. And what he discovered was the inverted pyramid technique, which is what reporters and journalists use to write articles. If you look at the goal, which I'm sure most of you have read, if you go back and find the early versions of the book before Ellie sat down and added an extra 100 pages about the periodic table onto the end of it. And I honestly, I think kind of for me, it killed the book. If you go back to the original version, you'll find that the pivot point in that where you've gone uphill, all these problems, a light bulb moment at the top of the hill, and then it changes direction, is when Ellie realizes, what's his name? Alex realizes that in his factory there's a bottleneck. Okay, so that's a really, really interesting thing. Now, some of the people on the screen here, when I worked with you when I was in Scotland, I remember sitting down with the UX team and they were having to go to a conference and they were thinking about how do we do this? And we sat down and we divided their story about how the work they'd done on UX into before, and then there's a pivot point with this light bulb moment, and afterwards, and it broke really neatly into two halves. So that's so if you're ever going to do a story, you're ever going to do a presentation and it's a real life thing, just sit down and think, what was the big light bulb moment? There'll be some stuff that happens beforehand, some stuff that happens afterwards. So if you take a look at now, my pivot point in my life, if I look back, was 10 years ago when I published this book. That was the point. The publishing was when my personal story changed direction completely. And before that, I was really like pushing rocks uphill, trying to get this book published. And so much of what came after after that point was only happened because I'd actually written that book. Okay. So it's just a really useful thing to think of. There's mountains, you push rocks uphill, you get this, here's a big change, and then everything changes direction. And it's not all downhill, it's not all gravity assisted. Sometimes it can be quite hard, but life changes. I'm going to move on. Right. So that was the classic three-act structure. One of the things I've discovered since I did this stuff is that, and I don't, I'm often, I often sit down and I tease myself and mock myself because I don't know how this turned out. But there's some people on the screens here I see in front of me who I know are very, very good at empathy because I've worked with you and I've talked with you. Um, and I just, and I often joke to myself that somehow I've turned in from a computer scientist to someone who's now quite empathetic. And I don't know how that happened, except I do when I look back. So much of it was because I wrote this book and I had to be able to get in other people's heads to write characters. Now, I don't recommend if you want to develop empathy to go and spend 10 years writing a, a business novel, but it's really, really interesting to sit down and try and get in other people's heads. And I've got an example coming up later where often what's going on in people's heads is totally different to what you might think it is. But I think I've gone from computer scientist to someone who's actually who probably possibly one of my main skills is being empathetic and helping get inside other people's heads in a nice, helpful, respectful way. Uh, and that wouldn't part of that maybe came with age, but so much of it came from actually sitting down and actually trying to write from the point of view of a character who I don't really necessarily um, know what's going on in their heads. So empathy can be learned. Just don't do it the hard way by writing a book. If you're born with it, embrace it, but don't let it hurt you. That would be the other side of it. Now, if there's one thing I could encourage you all to do, and this is really easy to encourage you, but it didn't come naturally to me, is that I almost live and breathe with metaphor now. I solve problems by finding a metaphor and solving the problem in the metaphor, and then bringing it back to real world. I wish I could teach that, but I have really I've just gone through and I've tortured myself, and that was a product of having to write a book where I had to find metaphors that explain things. So I know that. A lot of people like the French fry revelation in the book, which was about the reason why in Scotland in particular, but probably all around the world, you never let the fries, the chips go cold. And the way of doing that is you cook them in small batches. Um, uh, and that was effectively a metaphor, and I gave it a name. And I know I've had so many notes, people saying, I really like that because it's a nice way of putting it. And if you just say, oh, cook the chips, and if you just say, oh, work in small batches, it doesn't get in people's heads. But if you say, oh, you know how you cook chips? fries, and you put them in. You know how they go get cold really quickly, yada 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 yada. People can work through that, and then you go, well, the secret is to cook them in small batches, based on demand. And people go, oh, and then you go back from the silly little metaphor to the real world, and you go, how could that apply there? So metaphors was something I learned along with empathy, but they are the most powerful thing. And I tell you, if you can get 10% more metaphor in your life and 10% more empathy, it can be incredibly enriching for everyone around you. Okay, right. So that's the power of storytelling. If anyone's got any questions, or would like to interrupt, just feel free. But in the meantime, I will keep talking. Now, there's something I wish I could rewrite about Rolling Rocks Downhill, except it wouldn't work, because Rolling Rocks Downhill was about a business that discovered Agile. They didn't know what Agile was. Agile's only mentioned once in the book, and I deliberately put it in there in a non-software development context. I use the normal meaning of the word, just more than anything else, just to make me smile. But I wrote it because I wanted to get people to go, here's Agile. It's a really amazing strategic business tool. If you want to make more money, if you want to deliver projects on time, here it is. If you want to understand why it works, this is the stuff that is why it works. But more than anything else, I wanted to get people to go, that theory of constraints thing sounds a lot more interesting than the title might make you think. And that was what I was really hoping to do. And I don't know if I achieved much with that, but it's been my lifetime frustration and disappointment that the theory of constraints is called the theory of constraints. And if there's one thing I'm trying to fix, I'm trying to make the theory of constraints more accessible. But bottlenecks, right? What I've realized nowadays is now that people are doing agile all the time, and the teams are going, okay, as they transition, the bottleneck is normally still testing when they start out. And then over time, it flips around, and then the teams start racing ahead. And so long as no one messes with the team structure, they actually move the bottleneck to a deliberate place, which is development. And then the developers get upstream of the developers, everyone has time to do their work and feed in all sorts of wonderful inputs to the developers who do great work, and then the testers have plenty of time or capacity to turn around, find bugs, give the feedback, all of that wonderful stuff, and everything runs smoothly. Now, when I wrote, actually, the thing that's different is I realize now that the bottleneck in almost every software development initiative, unless you do something like I did in Rolling Rocks Downhill, which is I cheated, it's normally the equivalent of the Catherine character. So the Catherine character would be the product sponsor. It would be the customer. As I hope I don't get cancelled for calling what we used to call the customer. Now they're the head of product. They're the person that's setting the strategic direction for the project. They are almost always the actual bottleneck. And just earlier this week, I just stumbled across a really interesting example where someone who has more credibility than I said this. And you may not have heard of him, but his name is Kevin Systrom, and he was the co-founder of Instagram. And there's an interview with Tim Tim Ferriss. There's an interview with him, and midway through, he says, "Oh yeah, and while we were busy building into Instagram, we read one of us read this book called The Goal, and I think it was a guy called Goldratt, and it was about some scouts going for a walk and stuff, and they realized there was a slower scout, and we were sitting there trying to build this product, and this carried on forever, and it's one of the most useful lessons that we've learned, is we realized that for decision making, we were the Herbie, we were the slowest scout, we were the bottleneck." So we had to change the way we worked so that we weren't slowing everyone else down. And if you think of, if you look and say, if you imagine like the factory view of bottlenecks and stuff, and you can imagine there's a big pile of work building up in front of the bottleneck machine. in the knowledge work world we work in, that machine is usually one of the highest people paid people in the room. Uh, the pile of work is their inbox, and the work isn't widgets that are going to be turned into differently shaped widgets. It's decisions that need to be made. So that's really kind of become the focus of my work, so much since I moved back to New Zealand, is that leaders are linchpins in an organization, and they can either be overwhelmed and they're actually slowing everyone down because they are the bottleneck, or they've figured out how to work in a way where they're not the bottleneck. And it means that the whole organization just goes so much faster. So that would be the one thing. If I was to go back and reissue Rolling Rocks Downhill, I'd put a little appendix right at the end of it. I would say, "Hey, look, this is the most important thing that I've learned since then, from the point of view of developing commercially developing software." Right now, the clever CFO, Mr. Bruce Charlau. Hey, Bruce, I've known you for 20 years. Have I ever pronounced your name correctly? Did I do it right then?
Yeah, yeah, that was close.
It's close. Okay.
I'm sure you have. I don't remember. It's
Must have
been so
was.
long, as you say.
Yeah. So in the
I
book,
did find
yeah.
a worksheet or whatever that you gave out when we first met or whatever for the class you were running at the time or something in Edinburgh. So going way back 2003 or something.
Wow. As
It
it's
was
been a long
ages
time.
ago.
Bruce and I
Yeah,
have a shared delight in Bruce Springsteen, which is excellent. I think we've been to at least one or two of his shows together.
couple. Yeah.
Uh, and Bruce has also been my moral compass while writing the book, uh, giving me so much feedback and encouragement. And honestly, he earned, well, possibly the real hero in the book is not Steve, who's going through going through, who is the, is the obvious hero. It's possible to look at the book and go that Bruce's namesake, Eleanor Charlau, who's the CFO, is actually the hero in the book. She's the CFO and she's sitting between the CEO, who's going, "Oh my God, our company is gonna die. My career is over." And she's sitting there then talking to the head of software development, um, calming him down, focusing him on uh, saying, "Yes, we will deliver this project," and then forcing him more and more and more into a really, really tight spot where he actually has to change and not just do the usual thing of, "Oh, yes, of course, we'll hit that date. We'll nurse the thing to life afterwards, yada, yada, yada." And he actually sits down, and Eleanor repeatedly throughout the book makes him uh, act differently. So in a way, she's actually the hero because she caused the change to happen, as well as the circumstances. So just coincidentally,
Behind the
everyone.
scenes. Mm.
What was that? Sorry, Bruce?
Always behind the scenes. Yeah.
Always behind the scenes, like yourself.
It happens off stage. Yeah, yeah.
It does. It does mostly, doesn't it? And it's just so I'm sure if I don't know if anyone's had a heart attack and given up smoking, or stopped eating bacon, or maybe depending on your age, we've all had kind of variations on these things. Where things get really bad, and then we do the things that we always should do. Eleanor in the book made sure that happened. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a story. Um, there's this concept that I only learned about maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that actually just it's got a name. It's called the region beta paradox. And you can look it up if you're really interested. I think it's almost like as bad a name as the theory of constraints. Region beta paradox. I have no idea what it actually means by the name. But basically, what it boils down to is that if you want to make a change, sometimes you have to go from bad to worse. When it's bad, we suck it up. When it gets worse, we act upon it. And it's like a paradox because it seems stupid. You think you would make the changes before the heart attack happened, but you actually only make them afterwards, assuming you survive. I had bacon for breakfast, by the way, this morning. It was very nice. Uh, so the region beta paradox, Eleanor in the book, that the circumstances and Eleanor forced them to get worse and worse and worse until Steve actually had to do two things. One is he had to go and talk to someone who had different ideas, which was Craig, the mentor character. And then he actually had to think and think and think and come up with a better solution. So now I'm writing another really little book this at the moment called Stack the Deck. And I'm very deliberate about how I try and pronounce that because every time I just put it into my dictation software, um, it just comes out with a totally different title that sounds really quite rude. And I'm not going to say what it is, but you may have even heard that. So it's called Stack the Deck. I hope that came out okay. Um, and it's about delivering software projects on time. So it's like a really mini version of this book, but hopefully the sort of thing people can read in maybe 30 to 40 minutes. And one of the key ideas, isn't it, is that most people think that in order to deliver projects on time, you need more time. But actually, what happened in Rolling Rocks Downhill in more often than not in the real world nowadays, is that if you actually give people less time and then let them get creative and clever, they actually do that skunk works kind of thing, or they do that like the scene that you've all seen on the with Tom Hanks going to the moon, Apollo 13, where they suddenly go, "Wow, we've got these things. We've got to get creative and we've got to make this work." So there's a paradox here, is that if you want to deliver on time, give people less time, and then they'll get clever. And that's effectively the story of the book. Repeatedly, they took time away until they came up with new answers and new solutions. And the real transformation happens when you're forced to think differently. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on this one. But one of the things that when the book came out, just shortly afterwards, I stopped being involved with most of the agile stuff. And then every so often quite often I see stuff coming into my LinkedIn feed, and it's the same stuff that people were talking about 20 years ago, except it's got different names. And one of the names that people talk about, they hate frameworks, which is which I can understand, but frameworks have actually taken things like Scrum and Safe and all of that have taken the world a long way. The book, what I tried to write about was problem solving. So there's so much in the book. It's actually going, we've done this, now there's a new problem, and now we've got to solve it. So it's really about being creative and just this loop of constantly figuring out what problem to solve, and then solving it just enough, and then moving to the next problem. Um, and I think so sometimes I get a little grumpy when I see all this stuff and I see of people and they're kind of like productivity parrots. They're just repeating the same stuff that they've heard. And there's this kind of, I'm not sure if you can say this now, but it's like the Chinese whispers of productivity that have come back from generations and they keep getting repeated and repeated. But people keep just rolling out the same stuff and not actually understanding the first principles or applying them. So I didn't include the word agile in the book, and I'm really pleased I didn't. And I let people fill in. So when people read it, they can think it's about Kanban, they can think it's about um, Scrum, they can think it's about anything they like. But really, what it was about from the point of view of is it was a problem-solving framework. One of the nicest notes I've got, he's passed away now. He was uh, an emeritus professor from the States, and his first name was Claire, and I can't remember his last name, but he was big into commercial, into lean and theory of constraints and all that kind of stuff. And he read it, and he came back and he said to me, "This book is about the one of the finest examples of Boyd's OODA loop, OODA." And if you're familiar with that, it's really just a loop of problem solving, figuring out what you got to solve, solving it, not oversolving it, and then moving on. So, um, yeah, I actually think frameworks are really good. I think they're wonderful. But being able to solve problems when the frameworks don't work is huge. Now, the CEO priority myth. Rosalind will know probably who I'm talking about here. The rest of you, in fact, I haven't looked on the second screen. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone else will know. Doesn't matter. This was the CEO of a company where Rosalind and I worked together about 10 years ago in the old days. And I remember sitting, I had a chance to sit actually down with the big cheese CEO of the entire group that we worked with. He ran sessions and I said, hey, look, I'm just wondering, I hadn't published the book at this stage. And I had an answer in my head. And I was just hoping he would say the answer. I said, what do you guys really want to get out of? What would you really, really, really like? If you had a magic wand and you could wave it over the whole IT department, what would you love to get out of this? And he said, oh, no one's ever asked me that. He goes, architecture. Our architecture is shit. We need to fix it. Which was actually really good because that was actually kind of true. But I was thinking of something higher level than that. And as I say, I already had my answer in my head. And I said, oh, I thought you just would have wanted us to go faster, in the right direction, faster. And he goes, oh, oh, yeah. Well, no, I just wish you lot would figure out how to deliver on time. And now there's this that's was really obvious to him because but for me, I thought um, predictability, being able to deliver on time was kind of like a secondary thing because if you deliver faster, you're going to make more money. Da, 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 da. But from his point of view, the instability that came from projects delivering 3 months late, a year late, 2 years late, 6 years late, it made his job so difficult. It made him, when he was trying to predict out and tell people how well the company was doing and what they're going to do next, it made it diabolically difficult. And every time those delays happened, it cost money. It cost a huge amount of money. And it meant that the businesses were actually losing less. And now, if you think of it from a CEO's point of view, there's this a type of economics called, oh, I can't pronounce it, ergodicity, I think it is. Um, and it's the idea, actually, I'm not going to tell you the idea. The idea is that averages can be really, really deceptive because you've got to think of how things roll out in time. So just imagine you're the CEO and your first big initiative that you've been telling everyone out there, it's going to be amazing. And it's going to deliver in 2025. And the end of 2025 comes up. People are going, where is it? And you're going, it's 2026. I don't know. And you're crossing your fingers. And then 2026 comes in, and then something goes wrong, and then it's later. Can you imagine the odds of you being a CEO shortly after that are much lower than they were if it came out in 2025? My friend is a wonderfully creative marketing genius guy, Roy Sutherland. He talks about this a lot, and he talks about the idea of there's a very wealthy British family that had either two types of uh, leaders, the matriarch, patriarch, sorry, they'd either been drunks or geniuses. And over the last 200 years or so, I guess they started with a genius who made lots of money, and then they had a drunk who lost half of it, and then they had a genius who rescued it, and then they flipped and flopped. And he said the thing that's kept this family alive and rich all these years is that we never had two drunks in a row. Because you only need two drunks in a row and the business is gone. And that's the same if you're a CEO. You get two really bad projects in a row, that's your career over. It's also possibly your business over as well. So now the reason I shared this was I think that's actually a really interesting point. And from my point of view is I go my instinct is go faster, faster flow of cash. All that's really, really brilliant. But predictability and stability and looking like you're competent and not going broke, not having two drunks in a row is really, really, really important. And my bigger point with that is going back to when I mentioned empathy before. My natural empathy for him was fast. I thought I got it. I thought I was a genius. I thought I was going, hey, look, I thought you want to go faster, forget about the architecture stuff. And I was completely, in a really good way, um, told that I was wrong and what was actually more important. So sometimes you can guess empathy. Sometimes it's better to ask. Now, I don't know what's in this next one. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm not recommending anyone ever sit down and try and write a book and spend 10 years doing it. But there's some interesting things that came out of this for me. One is that when I talk to clients or new clients, often they've read my books. And I guess my personality comes through those books. So they've either filtered out that they think, oh God, I couldn't spend any time with him because he sounds like a real whatever. Or they go, oh no, 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 I think I know Clarke. And I got so when I meet people, often I've got kind of almost like a trust advantage because people feel like they know me and they can trust me. Um, and it never occurred to me, it certainly never was a deliberate thing, but I think it's real. The second bit is that I have over the years been able to charge a lot more money. Um, and I guess that's partly because of the trust. People know that they know what I'm talking about, and that they've already gone through and understood the problems. If you've read The Goal, and I'm sure almost all of you have, when Ellie wrote The Goal, we all think he was writing it for Alex, the plant manager. He wasn't. He was trying to sell his software, and he was writing it for the CFOs who had to sign off on spending 1980s money of hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, on his really, really expensive software. So he wrote that book to filter out people who go, we're not spending that much money on software. He wrote it so that the people who were signing off on all of this stuff had already gone through the book and gotten the same mindset going, yeah, we love this stuff. We really, really need it. It took me a long time I actually just wrote my book because I just really wanted to help people be able to do agile because I just thought it was. But the nice side effect for me is that I've earned a lot more money because of it. Another one is that I can get faster results because I've done all of that, so much prep up front when people read the book and they run through, and then you hit the ground running. Again, I'm not recommending you go and write a big book like that, but if you're of interested in this kind of stuff, I'm looking at Graham Scott there, who's written a wonderful, wonderful TOC book called Profit. No, Practice Makes Profit. And Graham and I were talking about the same thing, just being able to have that credibility and trust. And also brought people along on the mental journey of going, yeah, 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 I really like you. So Graham and I now, both of us write short books, partly because it's easier for us, but mostly because people don't read long books. Um, and having something that you can share with people like that has been really good for everyone. Right, now, we're nearly getting there. The ultimate twist. In the book, uh, there was a bit that I'm so delighted with it because I think it actually surprised people when it came out. It surprised me when I wrote it. But there's this bit where they're all sitting in this little theatre thing, and there's a presentation going on, and they're demonstrating the software, and it's supposed to be coming out, and everyone's going, "Is it going to hit the date or not?" And then it turns out, that the software is actually live already. They've done a soft launch on it and it's live and they've been using it and they've got a few customers actually using it and the quality is good. But it was early. The strangest thing that I'd never actually genuinely never seen a project of any decent size ever in my in my life up to that to the point where I had seen a project come in early. So I wrote that in. There's this lovely twist, uh, and then what actually happened in the real world is that the next big project that I worked with came in early. And I'd never actually gone on about that. I'd advised them all, but they came in and they had a soft launch, and they came in early, and they had really high quality. They'd effectively mimicked the fiction, because some of them had read the book and go, "Wow, never occurred to me that we could deliver early." So if I go back to my stack the deck, I can never. I'm gonna have to change the title. If I go back to my book. That I'm writing now. If you think about the way to deliver projects, so as I mentioned, there's a counterintuitive thing. The way to deliver projects on time is to have less time and be creative. That's one twist. The other one is that when in the old days, and still a lot of people think that a project delivers on time or it doesn't. But that's actually the wrong way of thinking it. Almost all projects deliver on time or late. That's almost the mindset. Um, but what if the opposite of on time or late was actually on time or early? And now I just want to step into a really kind of weird place. Civil War, American Civil War, prisoner of war camps. Um, you can imagine a civil war. They would have prisoners of war and they wouldn't have time to build a prison. So what they would do is they'd get a bunch of stones and they would put them around inside the prison and they'd say, this is the deadline. It's a deadline, right? If you stay inside this, you're alive. And if you go outside it, we'll shoot you and you'll be dead. And that's where the term deadline came from. Eventually, journalists borrowed the thing and they have deadlines on their articles and stuff. Um, now, the thing with the deadline is that going outside of it is like delivering late. Um, but you don't actually have to all stand around in the prison at the very edge of it. You just have to stay inside the deadline. So I think one of my hopefully if people read my next book a lot that the change in mindset will be that we don't try to deliver projects on time and then usually end up being late. We try and deliver them on time or early. We stay inside the deadline. And anyone that knows about critical chain, I'm looking at you, Jack, here in front of me, will know that's the mindset that we've got. And I think that's actually hugely important because it's funny, if you solve for that problem, uh, everything gets easier. Right. Uh, yeah, so that was the ultimate twist. But the ultimate twist, and this is the last bit, is that bacon. Remember, we've gone through this story. It starts with bacon, it ends with bacon. And in the midpoint, there's this small batches of good enough to ship software light bulb moment and the inverted pyramid method. When I read back this book, actually, it was probably as I was doing the audiobook, and I got the audiobook, the proof versions back, and I was listening to it. And I remember going up from Waverley Station in Edinburgh up the escalators to Prince's Street. And I started crying because the book ended. And I've never told anyone this before, so you're all very lucky. I'm being vulnerable, I guess. Um, I don't know. I started crying because at the end of it, I realized that the story had just ended, and Steve looks out the outside, and he sees his kids playing on the trampoline, and I know what the trampoline looked like, and he says something like, "Some things are more important than bacon," and it was the family and the kids, and he had just told off. He just told his CEO um, and his two bosses that he was going to think about what he did next. Um, and because his kids were more important, he'd been traveling a lot. And I realized that this was actually the story about me. But it took me, sorry, I'm getting a little bit I'm just thinking that now and trying not to break out. Uh, I'm talking over the potential of tears here, but it was really just true for me that the whole book was actually my journey of growing up and moving from and yeah, yeah of growing up. And I think what I've seen so many problems in software development stuff, the people that I work with so much of the time, we're kind of growing into this sensible, mature person that can have grown-up conversations with people. Um, they can sit down when a CEO says you have to deliver this stuff or else blah 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 blah, and sit there and say, oh yeah, okay, cool. Why don't we sit down and see how we can do this and how we can work together and how we can have a co-creative, blah, 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 collaborative kind of discussion about this. Um, Being able to get into that place took me a long time to grow into. And in the book, the thing that made Steve suddenly had this moment is I don't know if I spelled it out specifically, but it's he's sitting there and the CEO and Eleanor, the CFO, they want stuff from him. And then and so does his boss who lives in, I think, Germany, Norbert. Um, and they have this bit where they go, we want what you've got. And suddenly in his head, he goes, holy crap, they really want what I've got. And the power dynamic has suddenly shifted because I have something really valuable and really scarce, and they really, really want it. And then, if you forgive my language, he tells them, if in far nicer words than this, he tells them to fuck off. And he goes away and thinks about it. And so I think that was the journey for me. And I think that I would like to think that if squazillions of people around the world had read this book and got to that point, they go, wow, we've actually got something really, really valuable here. We don't need to be subservient. We just need to figure out how to collaborate with all the people that are outside of inside our teams, but more importantly, with the managers, the leaders, the people who wear big boots. So much of this is going, actually, I've got the power because I've got something very, very, very valuable here. And I think so many times when software projects have gone wrong, it's when we shrink back into the subservient mode rather than I guess you could say leaning in to the, hey, look, we've got something really valuable here. And we together have got something even more valuable if we get together and we solve the hard problems. And that leads us to me to stop talking. And I'm so glad I've still got 2 pages on Zoom here and you haven't all left. Now, that's me finished. Are there any questions or anything like that? Any thoughts? If you want to talk, Nelson.
Yeah, actually, this is not a question, but I was actually joining this call just to say thank you so much for writing this book.
Oh,
Um, you probably don't have any idea, but it shaped my career as a UX designer, and it's given me a competitive advantage that few other designers have. This is not a plug. This is not, Clarke. I know you didn't put me up to this, but when I see so many struggling with project delivery, it's almost like a superpower. To just go in and like, hey, yeah, it seems like everyone's trying to figure this out. No, it's just where the bottleneck is, and it's been so useful for me, not just for the work that I do, but also because I work with a bunch of clients that have complicated workflows, and to be able to apply, the lessons learned, from your book and the bottleneck rules, of course. It's I've made a lot of money thanks to you. So I just wanted to say thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're very kind. I'm trying actually. That's very. Could someone else talk, please? Thank you, Nelson.
You're welcome.
Richard.
Hi, Clarke. Yeah, first of all, Nelson's absolutely right. You do have some fantastic books, and I love the effort that you put into actually making them readable.
Now I'll move on to the actual question. I love as well. You were talking about uh, early or on time.
Mm.
Now, when I was a project manager, I actually ran a reasonable sized project, and I was actually running at 30% under budget, and no one liked it.
No.
Because all of a sudden it's like, if I'm under budget, then the people that are on my team and other teams, they must be over budget.
Yes.
And where's it coming from? And also, if you've gone under budget, then surely you didn't estimate correctly. So
Yes.
other next items are going to be challenged. So I love the idea of early or on time, but I think we might still have some challenges to actually accommodate it. Have you got any ideas and suggestions?
I think so much of this stuff genuinely comes down to having grown-up conversations with the people who care. Now, one of the lovely things, and again, I'm looking at Rosalind here because I work with Rosalind a lot. But in my last job I had in Scotland, this is kind of parallel. Hardly anyone knew I was there. Hardly anyone knew what I did, and I just wandered around and I had conversations with people, and it just sort of seemed to help people. And there were about probably 5 people who knew what I did, and actually knew what the results were, and they were the only ones that mattered. And so partly that was me. I had to do a lot of self-talk to go, no, I'm Yoda here. These guys, they're all the heroes. And I'm going to be Yoda. I'm going to sit in a swamp, and I'm going to help these people, and they're going to be successful. But I need to make sure that there are just a handful of people who actually know what I'm doing. So the reason I'm saying that is that there are only a handful of people who actually have to be on your side. And they're probably not the people that you're working directly with. They're probably the ones at the top, when you're talking with them and going, hey, look, this is brilliant. I think this is good. We're under budget. You might think we underestimated. I suppose in a way we did, but actually we've just got lucky and we've been really, really, really clever. What do we do with this extra money? Do you want us to finish early? And then we can start some other stuff, and have a collaborative conversation with the vital few people who actually matter. All the other ones, there's going to be whispers and just that small-mindedness that's going to go around with everyone else. But most people's opinions don't matter, but some do, way, way, way more disproportionately than others. Yeah, that's what I would do. The inconvenient thing is it's conversations, and I think if you can deliver a project on time, I'm pretty sure, Richard, we already know how to have those conversations.
But again, it's like you were saying, it's about growing up. And at that point in time, I most definitely wasn't able to actually have those right kind of conversations.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I use this metaphor that I really love, and it's so simple. Now, I'm conscious some of the people here from Australia. Originally, when I was thinking about a lot of the work I do is just helping people, and it sounds awful to say growing up, but people have said, "Oh, you helped me grow up," and so I went searching for a metaphor, and I started with snakes, and snakes get bigger and bigger and bigger. They get bigger by shedding their skin, and otherwise they have a constraint, which is that their skin is this thing, so they actually have to shed their skin and grow bigger. And that's a lovely kind of metaphor if you think about growing physically. But I didn't like it because when I was working with Australian people, it just felt kind of like a little bit there. So I went off to ChatGPT and we had a long conversation about metaphors, and it come up with one I've never seen before. And I've used a lot. I think it's really good, is the idea of hermit crabs and how they grow, and then they move to a different shell, a bigger shell. They have to go naked, out of their shell, cover their bits, wander over, pop into this other shell that's bigger, and then they suddenly have to adapt to a bigger shell. And I think that's what we all do. It's not just about physical growth. There's when you go to this new shell, you've got to cast away some of the stuff that you used to own and you used to care about. And you've also got to go, I'm thinking like when you move to a new apartment, when suddenly when you had kids and you go, oh no, I've got to get rid of all of that big box of cables that I might use one day. And I've been saving them up for the day that I need a printer, da 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 da. And I got to get rid of them. And then you go, and then your partner says we need a new couch or we need this. So when you move into a bigger shell, you've got to get rid of some stuff. They're the same little hermit crab that you always have been, and you've got to bring some other stuff in. So I think the growing into yourself um, is really important. And I think and if there's one skill that some people have more than others, and I'm certainly was always really behind one of the slower ones, is figuring out how to grow up faster. Um, end up in and also figuring out how to only grow into the size shell where you actually really fit and feel comfortable. Yeah, cool. I will switch across. Thank you, Richard, to Rosalind. Hello, Rosalind. I think you put your hand up.
Yes, I did. Yeah, nice to see you, Clarke. Lovely.
Hello. Lovely to see you.
It was really just to support that and say very much that I think the key for me at the time was you didn't focus on process. So we didn't talk about this is a new process that we're going to follow because people switch off or they get scared of it or they think it's something bad. And you turned conversations to we can do a bit more. What would you like us to do next? We finished that bit. So what might we do next rather than you finished early, you've underestimated. I'm going to challenge you the next time. So it flipped to what felt like a very positive conversation rather than a negative one. So maybe that's another way to look at it.
I like that. It's funny because I don't know, most of us don't know what's going on, so it's actually really nice to hear that. I remember, so I've been trying to get Rosalind to watch The West Wing, because it's the most instructive, useful. In fact, on January 20th, I'm probably going to start watching it all again for some bizarre, unrelated, coincidental reason. But if you went back and if you summed up the West Wing, there's a saying that President Bartlet has, and it's "What's next?" It's almost his mantra, and you'll see it said throughout the entire 7 series. Thank you. I'm not sure if you mean to share there, but that's the I've got to get that. Thank you. The West Wing. What's next? What's next? What's next? And what he would say is, he said it. You just started noticing it, and actually, to be honest, I've watched The West Wing probably 8 times, maybe 12 times, all the way through. And it was only on about the 10th when I go, he keeps saying that all the time. And my wife goes, yeah, he said it right in the very first episode. And have you only just figured this out? And I had, but it was the rhythm of being the president was, hey, look, we've got this big thing going on, big problem. Let's solve it till it's good enough that we don't need to do it. Move on to what's next. And then the rest of it's fine. You don't stop thinking about it. And he had this thing said, when I say what's next, I mean what's next, and we're moving on from what the thing is. Yeah. So it's such a simple rhythm to life. Anyway, thank you, Rosalind. Alex.
Is that me? Hi.
Would be, yes. Hello.
Hi.
G'day.
Hey, man. I'm just impressed to see this bunch of people enjoying how you do things. I sort of gravitated towards your use of metaphor and everything, and just the the whole theory of constraints way
Yep.
that's done and stories and everything. But I've done a personality test, and it's opened up my mind to the thought of why some people like it and some people don't, and it may be a personality thing. I was told, roughly speaking, that dominant people will be your CEOs and everything, and you'll have to sell your services to them. and they just want how you're solving their problem. And the story and the analogy and the metaphor maybe too long,
Yep.
goes over their head, and they like get frustrated. I was just wondering if you had that experience, or you just look for the people that get it through
Yeah,
metaphor.
that's a really good point. So to be clear, you can use metaphor and analogies for at least two things. One is to solve problems, and the other one is to sell problems, or to sell the solution to those problems by clarifying them. Um, they're not the only way. When you think of it, selling them, the other ways that you can do them, and I do have another one of my books I haven't written yet, but I have written out the outline is just using 2x2 matrices, or XY graphs with a curve that goes up like that. Um, take so I'm trying to think. So for instance, the 2x2, so many problems can be positioned in a 2x2 matrix. So like I'm going to usually because there are false dichotomies. So if you think of the evaporating cloud, it's so much about having a dichotomy between on the one hand do this, on the one hand do that. You can take a cloud and turn it into a 2x2 matrix, and actually more often than not, I will prefer to do a 2x2 because and figure out what the axes are. And then when you want to improve things, usually you want to go from where you've got one side only to where you've got the best of both worlds. So, for instance, a lot of stuff that's very popular in the agile world that I keep saying thing is that we do products, not projects. So I get thinking, well, I do both. I have been for a very long time. I'm not sure why you do one or the other. And then usually it's a definition problem. But then you can draw like a 2x2. You go, well, we've got high product on this side, high project here, and then you got some people who are living in one corner of each, and then other people who are living and getting the best of both worlds. So sometimes presenting stuff to someone who's in a hurry as a 2x2 and just say, look, we've got these two things here. We're currently here. We want to go from there to there. What's stopping us? It engages similar parts of the brain, but it looks much more much we sit down and go, oh, we've got these crabs. I'll give you a different example. We've got these crabs and they go from hermit, blah 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 blah. People, oh, that's very nice. But then if you draw something, we've got an S curve. So it's an XY and it goes like this, and then it goes like that. And then there's this inflection point. And you might remember Andy Grove wrote about this um in his book, Only the Paranoid Survive. But then when you get to that point there, you've almost like, like a hermit crab, you've got to get out of that shell and move into a bigger shell. And that's how you get, instead of ending up going on a curve that goes down, you end up on a new curve that goes up and to the right. And you can mix that together, but some people the graphics are a really good way. I try and start with both. And I've used metaphor for years and years and years because it allowed me to solve problems that other people couldn't. And then when I realized that most of the really high paid um, consulting companies use 2x2s or XY or upward facing arrows, I suddenly go, oh, there's a reason for that because they visually communicate really, really quickly. And then if it works, you can mix and match both together.
Okay.
It's a good point. And their personalities, you'd be surprised. A lot of people who are in a hurry want that quick thing, but then when they've got grabbed, they go, oh, now I need to understand this. And that's often a good point where you bring in it's like the hermit crabs. They go, oh, I never thought of that. That's a really good analogy. Um, but that you've got to grab their attention with something that's usually quick and easy to grab hold of. Good
Gotcha.
question.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you, Alex. So anyone else would like to got a thought or no?
Yeah, I think just one was more of a comment than anything else. I've done a couple of courses with Judy Rees over here in the UK, and clean language is very much her thing, and
Mhm.
talking in metaphor to very much to gain a deeper understanding, from an individual, and in terms of problem solving, well, having the flip question, well, how would you like it to be, that sort of question. So it very much what you've said and what she was saying very much bolt together.
I have been avoiding reading her book for at least 15 years, and it keeps coming up, and I must. Um, yeah, cool. Thank you, Kerry. That's really good. Sorry, I couldn't see where you were on the screen, and so I was trying to catch up with your voice. So thank you for that. Where are you? Where are you, Kerry?
I'm in Bristol, UK.
Bristol. Lovely place. Yeah, and getting bit cold and getting later.
It's a little warmer than it was, yes, absolutely. But the last few days have been a little bit on the cold side, yes.
Cool. No storms at the moment, so that's good. Okay, okay. Julia Pryor. I see. Thank you, Kerry. Julia Pryor. Go for
Hi,
it.
Clarke. Hi, everyone. Just very briefly to what Clarke was saying about growing up in one's professional role, I guess, and growing up generally. I just wanted to express my thanks to Clarke for the last couple of years. I've known Clarke since about 2021, and really have valued his coaching and my interactions with him. They have helped me grow up in very different ways to
Thank you.
previously. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. It's nothing to do with Julia here, but can I tell you that one of the most lovely things, and I'm looking at you, Rosalind, as well, is that there are some people in the world, I've mentioned your names coincidentally, who just I've learned so much from just by brushing off from their joyfulness. And so it works both ways, I think. But actually being able to I've mentioned this a few times to Rosalind I've said similar things to Rosalind that you've just said there, Julia, offline and previously. But it's really nice to brush up against people who, if you want to imagine a 2 by 2, and draw it here, that if you got nice and strong here, and they're sitting up in this corner and got both. That's really that's my wife is like that, and that's and so I attribute a lot of my growing up to her. But if you've got nice and strong, I hope those are the right words. But it's really nice to brush off that and actually see people acting in those ways. I'm trying not to embarrass both of you, but you can learn a lot by studying what other people do and then copying them. So yeah, so thank you back. Anyone else there? Anyone else got look, honestly, if you guys want to say nice things to me, that's cool. Just keep going. But if you've got any questions or want to tell me anything, anything, ask away, answer away. No, we're looking pretty good.
Just one question. When are you publishing your next book?
Oh, Ellie Goldratt once told me, he said, I'm too old for deadlines. And then he died shortly afterwards, which was really unfortunate, and his last book never got published. So I just had that moment. February will be the draft, will be the beta version coming out. Actually, if anyone's interested, there was another point I had in there, and it's about writing books, and I'll just mention it. Rolling Rocks Downhill was a huge 10-year undertaking, and it was a waterfall project done 5 times because I wrote 5 drafts of it as I learned to write, and it got from being terrible. I'm sure there's some names like a terrible, unbearable, wearable, smearable. I don't know. It went through stages where it got to a point where it was actually good enough, but it was 5 waterfall projects effectively, analogously, where I would write stuff and then I would rework it and rework it and rework it. And then I would write it and I'd rework it and rework it and rework it. And the last little bit where I kind of got my light bulb moment for the rest of my life was when I was walking down Dundas Street, I think it is, in Edinburgh, walking down the hill one morning, and at the bottom of it, there's this place called Clarke's Bar, and it's nothing to do with me. But I walked past it and I kept thinking, oh, it's really annoying because I've been reading all of these books about the structure of books, and they got this 4-act thing, but mine's 5 acts. And they're all wrong. And then I walk past this, and in the space of 200 meters, I go, oh, you idiot. You idiot. Maybe they're right. And maybe my book. And 2 months later, I chopped off the last act, moved one chapter of it earlier in the book, and just rewrote in a few of the little linkages. And I threw away 30,000 words that I had written, and they became the beginning of the next book. So notice there I descoped dramatically after a huge amount of work in order to deliver. When I then realized that much later, small books were the answer. And I think maybe 5 years later, I put out the Bottleneck rules. And I knew I'm going to start with a small book. So I said 30,000 words. And I wrote a 30,000 word book. And then the week before I published it, I took the last 12 or 13,000 words off it. And suddenly I had the right book. And the first half didn't change. I maybe moved one chapter back in and just chopped it in half. And then when Corkscrew Solutions came out, I only probably got rid of maybe 3,000 words because I was getting better at writing small books. And then when I wrote The Bottleneck Detective, which came out last month, I sat down and I outwitted myself enormously. I thought, I don't want to descope. I want to do what I talk about when I talk about agile projects. I want to build a foundation, and then I want to layer on top of it. And then I want to stop when is the right time to finish. So I went into ChatGPT and I told it, I want to write this, blah, 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 blah. Bottleneck detective kid somewhere, and it wrote my first chapter for me. And I told it, I want really short. I don't want it to be literature, just really short. I just want just this first chapter and I want to build onto it. And I told it more or less what was going to be in there. And it wrote out the first chapter. And it was awful. But then I rewrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it manually. And then I popped it back into ChatGPT and now I want the second chapter based on the first one because it's a story. And the problem that the second chapter will solve is this one. And so suddenly it writes out this and I go, actually, that's pretty good. I get a little bits there, but don't worry about the little bits that I don't like. Now write the next chapter and the next chapter. And then I go, wow, this is actually really good. So what I then did is I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get this published is if I go public. So I decided to do an email course where each chapter was, so I took the chapters I had, people signed up for the email course, and I put the first one out, rewrote it, and I got lots of feedback here. Some of Joe somewhere on the screen here gave me lots of feedback. Joe, there you are. And I then went back and I rewrote them and I rewrote them. But then when I got to the end of it, I go, oh, that's it. And I had my first draft. And then I took it away and then I just rewrote it all again. But I never had to add any other stuff on. Actually, no, I did add a little bit on once I'd finished it. But I discovered an agile way of writing books, which is to get your foundation and then build onto it. And all of the work is just like in a software project, figure out what your foundation is, and then you can add on and on and on and on. And so it took me 10 years to finally get to a point where I go, actually, I can write books incrementally now, provided I figure out what the first chapter is. And I set a low enough word limit. And if I also do it in a way where I actually have to ship stuff as I go and get feedback, rather than just having a work in progress that just I keep fine-tuning and never publish. There you go. So now you guys all know how to write books and solve all of those problems. Can I just go to Bruce here, who's got his hand up? Hello, Bruce. Oh, I can't hear you. Your microphone's... No, can anyone else hear Bruce?
No.
No. Oh, no. Take your time, Bruce. You were working okay before.
There we go. Now you can hear me?
Hello, Bruce.
Right, okay. Bluetooth settings. Daughter's AirPods suddenly had the microphone. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah. Hello. We've all been there.
Following on what you were saying there. Will we ever see more of Stephen and Phippy?
Oh, not in a business novel.
Right.
I have some ideas, but most of it, the next hill, the next point is me realizing the top of the hill here. I've now found a mode of writing short books that people really seem to like, reading short books, and I found a way of writing them, which I've just described. So I have been playing around with the stacking, the deck book. Oh God, I'm gonna have to change that name. It's really getting in my head here. With that book, I have been playing around. Actually, I just played around a little bit. ChatGTP is really helpful. I've written out the first lot there, of the first chapters, and I don't think I'll write this because I don't think it works as a story, but I just did play around. I uploaded Rolling Rocks Downhill to the book, having written the first quarter of it, and I had ChatGTP write me a little bit and just say, what say the characters actually used an AI version of Steve having read that book? What would it look like? And I just felt like it was maybe a little bit twee, the mechanism. But I did have bits where Steve goes, oh, the inverted pyramid method, we did this. But it was very important that you built software that was good enough to ship, which I call GETS. And so I had that there. So I think I may write stuff where I bring it in. I just feel a bit kind of like, yeah,
I know that sounds like the Phoenix Project, which was excruciating to read.
Yeah. Although a lot more people read it than read my book.
No, but yeah. Anyways, okay. That's the answer. I thought we'd get something on that. No, I don't do long format. I just do short format, episodic. Yeah, which is fine. It works.
It's a good question.
Brilliant.
The one thing I have done, and it's based on an email that Seraphim, who's somewhere on the call, sent me, and a few people, I think Jay may have also mentioned it, that I'm seriously thinking, and I have gone through and kind of got the ideas percolating in my head of taking the cafeteria scenes with Cheryl, I think it was, where they go and they learn all of this stuff from that. They learn about the French fry revelation and the China crisis, which was about the bottlenecks, and the small batches and tasting and testing and the soup and all of that stuff. And now it won't come out and be called Rolling Woks Downhill, but I have seriously thought about taking the lessons from that and putting them in a little book, because there's so much you can learn by that analogy, of going to a kitchen. But I don't want to commit to that, because again, it's Douglas Adams in one of his books wrote that he keeps having good ideas, and when he has a good idea, he tries to avoid them because they usually end up in causing him trouble. And I'm kind of thinking the same thing there. That one has to percolate for a while.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Clarke.
And thank you, Bruce, for making me write my damn book. Is there anyone else or anything there? We're looking good. Might be a good time to go to bed, some of you.
I think you should say more about you mentioned it in one of your posts recently, the kind of anti-management trend in Agile, and like your book really goes counter to that, right? And I think a lot of your writing goes counter to that. And I think that's really important because there's this whole blame culture that goes around, right? And it's not always the manager, like the Deming people say, oh, it's the management blaming the people, but the Agile people go the other direction, and it's not any better, right? And it's so it's like that. I think you've had a lot of really good things to say about that. I wish you would say more about that, or even write a book about that.
Thank you, Seraphim. Actually, does anyone have any thoughts on that? And I tell you what, I am seriously. I almost got cancelled at a conference about 8 years ago because after the conference, I said something that offended someone, and they complained. And it felt like an entirely reasonable thing. So I'm very, very nervous because it was a horrible experience when I had 200 nice people telling me how horrible I was for about a comment that they hadn't even actually read. So I'm really a bit nervous of writing about that, partly because of the piling on. The it just feels like a brave thing to do, to go and write about, hey, look, you guys preach collaboration, and you don't seem very collaborative. It feels like it makes me nervous, and I don't know if I could write something that's well enough that didn't just bring me a world of pain, to be honest.
Well, one of the things I think that is really interesting about this whole problem is like it's easy to blame the blamers, right? And then you just fall into the same trap that the blamers are falling into. And so if like you can somehow, I mean, to me, there's like a cloud there. How do you address the blame problem without blaming?
Actually, maybe that's it. There's a two by two.
Yeah.
And we somehow want to get from here to there. Yeah.
Hi, Clarke.
Hello, who said that? Robert. Hello, Robert.
Sorry, I can't find my hand on Zoom today, which is
The last time I looked at you, I think you had bunny rabbit ears on anyway.
Clarke, I'll just add one point, and this is a general point about a group of people that are not sort of taking on new ideas. As I know, Clarke and many people there realize I get involved in construction projects on a variety of capacities. And there is a lot of resistance to doing anything different for all sorts of reasons. Mostly they will say it's contractual, commercial, all this sort of nonsense, or work areas. And they'll also say that they're collaborative while they're yelling at you, which I've seen over quite a long period of time. What I've found works is to get into a simulation exercise where you question them. So a few people in this group will be familiar with the PQ exercise or the dice game, and there's a whole heap of other things. It's actually, you've got to get the people who are the people who are resistant. So whether it's management or whether it's there, and I've been following your comments about the Agile community saying it's all a management problem, when most of the people don't actually understand what the management have to go through to do, and the pressures that are coming both ways. So what I like to do, and I've got another exercise which a number of you may not be used to, but what's the difference between a process and a system? And there's actually a three-phase simulation exercise on that to do. But to actually get people then open to look at the ideas and then move on to other things. And one of the things about your book, plus Graham's book, plus a few other people on this group that I know, is you can quickly refer to articles or ideas that, from what you interpret as fixing their problem. But the actual exercise whatever it is, gets the mind open, and at least will be more of a productive conversation, as opposed to what's happening in Australia in the construction industry at the moment. It's highly political, a lot of stuff on the press, a lot of politicians saying this, and nobody's really going towards the root causes, which is information overload and really poor data architecture. That's
Yeah.
I'd add that is that your simulations and however you do it or works, and your books read like some of them read like a simulator, particularly your last one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually that's a really if I were to go back and rewrite my list of things, the most influential book for me for writing Rolling Rocks Downhill was Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And I'm not sure, but I think the Bottleneck Rules is mentioned in their next book, which is coming out in a few weeks, or one of the brothers has got a new book. It is in the early draft. He may write me out, so don't tell anyone that. But what he said and what they said in Made to Stick is that stories are like a flight simulator. And so that so writing a little book is particularly useful because it's like a little flight simulation session where you run through and you live through it yourself. And you all know when you read when you read a story, how it actually can affect you emotionally as well as intellectually. It's like a simulator. So actually, that's really useful, Rob. I don't think I I don't think I have the skills to create games and things. I've tried and it just I don't play them, so I don't know how to do that. But writing a story is very, very similar. And be able to simulate. And that, if you think about it with the analogy or metaphor, moving to an analogy or metaphor is also like a flight simulator, where you go away, you learn something, and then you bring your head back and you apply it. Yeah, okay. So thank you, Rob. That's really good. Can I check who's hanging around now out of politeness? No, everyone's going, oh, maybe. Yeah. Because if you'd like to hang around, I'm happy to chat. But if anyone feels like it might be, because I know it's late for some of you, and I know actually some of you have proper jobs that you got to go to as well. No? If anyone would like to keep chatting, you're welcome to stay, but please don't feel like you need to stay here. Because although I actually have Graham is sitting there noting down people who've left early, and we'll be having a talk with them later. See you, Rob. See you, Kerry. Thank you for coming in. See you, Malcolm. There we go. That cleared out the riffraff, didn't it? Right. Okay, we're looking pretty good now. Well, thank you, everyone. Is there any other thoughts or anything else? Steve Harrison, are you there? Because I know Steve was busy cooking. Hey!
I am here. Just I've got a lot of people around me and I'm cooking. But I couldn't miss you doing this.
Thank
It's
you.
been wonderful to hear it all. And well, I share all your material with so many people so many times.
You do.
It's such a powerful way in which you simplify some complex concepts. Here's a question. I'm always known for asking awkward questions. Here's a question. What was the question you didn't get to ask Ellie that you would have really liked to have asked? And then the second follow-up question is what's the question that you hope to answer before something you no longer can?
Oh, so can you ask the first question again? Because it just blurred.
Yeah, I'll ask them both again. So the first question is, what's the question you didn't get a chance to ask Ellie before you no longer could? And then the second question, the follow-up question, really, is what's the question you hope most to be able to answer yourself before you no longer can?
I hope you don't know something about my health that I don't.
No, I think it's Ellie mentioned to me about life is our ultimate constraint. Really, that's and that still rings in my head all the time. There's only so many, and with other people I've worked with as well, it's similar. So I keep on reflecting back on that. You've told us today about your maturity growing up, which one of the things we've all done, I guess. We've all gone from being the young snotty punk with the post-its to being able to have the conversation with the CEOs and drink nice wine and tell them their business is going wrong.
I like.
All right. But how about? I'm really curious. Yeah.
How about we've got a we've got. I reckon I shouldn't be the only one that answers the first question.
Well, you're right. Yeah.
We've got a few people here. I'm just wondering. So for me, if there's something, if I could grab the ghost of Ellie Goldratt by the throat and just say, Ellie, why didn't you set up a succession plan? That would be my my question for him. And maybe he thought he had. But yeah, that would be my first question. I'm wondering. The second one for me is I'm wondering the same question. Not that I compare myself with Ellie. We might be on a similar continuum somewhere, but he's definitely to the far end of it.
No, don't forget, you don't know what happens until your books have been read for 100 years. That's a Japanese proverb.
That's true. Actually, I got one. Richard's sitting there. Now, it's blurry. That is Richard Zoltner, isn't it? The young Richard Zoltner sitting there. Yep. On the beach. Yeah. Okay. So Richard told me something that I've extrapolated from several years ago. And I'm going to put it in my words because I realize it's the same thing I've been doing, which is, growing up. Ellie was effectively making up this stuff as he went along. And so as he was writing stuff, he was figuring out things and we were learning things. And I reckon we've all gone through that journey. But I looked at Ellie's stuff from the point of view of not that he was making it up at the time and learning it. So I think once I realized that, you go, oh, wow, okay, he was just like the rest of us. But he was making up stuff, but he had a whole lot of skills. And probably in some way, I mean, it wasn't maybe genius to write a business novel. Maybe it was luck that he wrote a business novel and it happened to be exactly the right thing to do. So I think that, anyway, Richard, I often come back to that that comment. You may not even remember staying at, but you were in TOC. I'm not sure, maybe 10 years before I was. So you saw this coming out and growing as it was being made up. And I remember seeing him on talks where he would say, "I have new knowledge," and I go, "Whoa, new knowledge." It feels like, but that's what he had. He'd gone away, and him and his colleagues and a whole bunch of other people had come up with new knowledge, and they were sharing it. I'm wondering if you've ever thought on that, Richard.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Ellie Goldratt did. His choice of a business novel was very intentional. I mean, I recall one time he talked about that, and even the involvement of Alex Rogo's wife was intentional so that the book could be given to plant managers' spouses, and this is in 1980, okay?
Yes.
And then the spouse would insist that the plant manager husband read it.
That's clever, isn't it?
Yes. So it was very well thought out. It was very intentional, very well thought out, and everything that's in there, there's a reason why it's in there.
Yes. I wonder if we got lucky though, because I mean, he could have written a business novel and go, bleh, and no one read it. But he would have changed direction. He was a very clever guy, wasn't he? And he tried a lot of stuff.
And he did write business novels that nobody reads because for a variety of reasons, like necessary but not sufficient.
Haystack Syndrome, my classic favourite. Not a novel.
Well, the Haystack, he told me that that was his best book, and and he was probably right. But
I still think he could be right with that, as in the clarity and the knowledge that we all share from the P&Q game is so clear, and has such a gestalt, aha, call it what you will moment with so many people. I've seen finance directors throw calculators at me across the room doing that game.
maybe they just don't like you, Steve.
Yeah, that's the case as well.
They go, oh, what have I got that I can chuck at this guy? Calculator, right? That's good. Has anyone else got is there a question that you'd like to, maybe we could come up with an AI version.
You still haven't answered the last question though, Clarke. You've done very well at hiding from the last question. What's the question you want to be able to answer before you no longer can?
Oh, that's
it's a hard question.
It is actually that my first shot would, I think, genuinely be something I said earlier. I would really like to know how I could have grown up faster.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be, because I know I feel really weird in my work that I talk with people who I consider to be grown up, and I'm still sitting here trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And yet often the stuff that we do, they end up, they tell me they've, you helped me grow up. And I don't feel like I'm qualified to help anyone do that because I've been so slow at it myself. But I think it's maybe, I think it must be, what if growing up was not just a product of where you started from and of time, but what if you could actually speed that up?
Wow. What a concept. I think that's what AI might help, isn't it? In the future, if you think about it, you can learn from what you've done from other people and learn from what they've done. You don't just stand on the shoulders. You get the chance to.
Yeah, it's
that's very, yeah. I get that.
Now I know
I'll let somebody else ask a question now.
People around you. Have you thought about the answers to these questions? Because
you knew that. It's the one question which I'm going to reflect a lot on 2025. I think that I lost somebody close last year. I've had a number of friends. No, it's okay. I've had a number of friends lose people. As we get older, one of the things we realise is that more and more people around you don't necessarily keep on making it through the race. You do start thinking, and I reflect on that. I only met Ellie once, and he told me two things. One, he offered me to go and travel around the world and try and make the world a greener place using TOC, which I reflected on and decided not to do. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing was he told me that life was just too short, and that that is the ultimate constraint. If you're trying to do anything, life is too short. And so, like you said, succession is the thing that I think most about. Is how do I ensure that the learning that I have gets handed on, that the lessons that we each learn in a meaningful way gets handed on, but without ego, without well, somebody earlier said clean language. I'm a great fan of clean language. You're putting out the context so it can be taken by somebody else into their context is I think part of the challenge. I think you do that really well with your writing. I mean, the last one, the Bottleneck Detective is just brilliant, and I do hope you write more of those because I can see children need to read that book. Youths need to read that book. We all need to read the book.
Thank you. That's very cool.
But yeah, that I think, yeah, I've reflected on that question. I think is the one that affected me the most at the moment in my thinking. What next, and how do I help others even more? Yeah.
Legacy, as Richard's persona has just a children's
book.
Legacy,
children's book.
I don't know. Rob Newbold, who you may know from Critical Chain, probably about 10, maybe 15 years ago, he wrote it was almost like, it was a lovely little story. I can't remember much about it. I remember just reading it going, really enjoyed that. It was like his TOC mind, but he'd written a book. It felt like it was written maybe for 19-year-olds or maybe 15-year-olds. I must contact him and see if he's still. I don't think he published it, but I remember reading the early version. It was a lovely little. It was just maybe you could call it a novella, and it was lovely. It felt like a legacy book that you could leave behind for other people. Right. So I see 1, 2, 3. Richard, have you written a book?
It's
Yet.
on my bucket list.
All right. I got a challenge for you. Go to the ProChain website. There's this really brilliant article there written by this called Richard Zoltner, I think his name might be, and it's about multitasking. And it just feels like it'd be really. I've stolen your example and modified it and used it for about 20 years based on what was in that article. I reckon that'd make a really nice short little book. Just if you wanted a suggestion.
This is on the ProChain website?
Yeah, and I think it may have been in the Cutter Journal. Was it?
On
Do you remember that?
multitasking? My
Yeah.
Cutter article on multitasking? Okay, thank you. I will consider my hindquarters kicked.
Excellent. Seriously, 20 years. I have used that. I haven't read it since I first used it. I've modified it to suit my style and stuff. But the example you used in that, I have used it over and over and over again. So there you go. You've already got legacy. There you go. Hindquarters kicked. Okay, so now we've got Richard's going to write a book. I've written a book. I'm looking on the top. Graham's written a book. Steve, you've written 3?
No, not real books.
No, different Steve. Sorry, Steve Tendon.
Oh, right. Oh, yes, Steve Tindon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now he's got the library.
Well,
Steve's got a
I think-
library.
I think it's 5 actually.
5, is it? Right. Seraphim, when are you writing a book? Little book, 5,000
Once
words.
I have something to say.
Now.
I don't know what to say.
Why don't you make a list? You know how Richard says he's got a bucket list. Why don't you make a fuck it list? And you go, fuck it, I'll write it about this thing. To steal from Obama. I reckon you've got too many things you could write about.
Yeah, I have lots of little things I suppose I could write about, but I always feel like as soon as I start writing it, I'm already thinking ways to improve it. And then it's like, now I just need to improve it.
Right. Okay.
I never actually get
5,000 word limit. So it's a really, really small book, and it will become 10. Graham, we had this chat, didn't we? Probably about 3 years ago. The secret is to set the low word limit and not allow yourself to overrun, but you will. But if you start trying to write a 70,000 word book and you'll write 150 and you'll spend forever writing it, 5,000 words on something that makes you that feels like maybe it could be a little tiny legacy book. You know, there you go. And I know you've got enough stuff from what we've talked on. Andre, I don't know you, Andre.
You and I have corresponded, and I've also corresponded with Graham about his book. But I have a question for you guys. Do you find that, because all of you write books and they tend to be story books, very similar to The Goal, and believe me, they're quite effective with understanding, very simple to follow. But have you ever thought, is there a challenge if you were to write sort of an execution manual, right, or an execution book that said, okay, because I just finished writing a book for one of my clients, right, and so it's a 6-week leader standard work implementation, and it's broken down and it references all the tools and the files and everything, and they're testing it now. But I wonder if there's really an interest in the marketplace for anything that's, hey, here's how to paint by numbers, right? And is there an interest in that, or do people just go, I'll figure it out on my own. I'd rather have something that just points me in the right direction. Does that make sense?
I reckon the answer is yes. Some people, do you remember I talked about Rolling Rocks Downhill being about problem solving, effectively with that what's next loop, and yet many people want a framework that tells them kind of what to do. Maybe there's, for some of us, there might be, they could be stepping stones from one to the other. So one gets people go, oh, that's really interesting, I would like to know how. Or it could be like the books are stepping stones to courses, or they could be stepping stones to consulting. Some people actually are really happy to buy an instruction manual, so they don't have to do all the thinking, and that's a really good thing.
Because I've noticed that you guys, particularly even with Kevin Coles with his Addicted to Hopium, it's geared towards a story that's very similar to the goal, and I'm it's effective. Don't get me wrong. I guess the question is, when you look at people in the lean space in Six Sigma, they're happy to give you instructions and show you exactly how to execute and get you down that rabbit trail forever. But in our space, those of us that are drawn to TOC and the fact that it works and effectively, how do we lay out those step-by-step kind of dynamics so that people can go and do it, and all of a sudden credibility goes up, right, to the method?
Anyone else got a thought?
As my thought around that is the idea of writing in stories is so people can get the concepts and principles, and then some people, a small percentage of those that read it, will be able to go away and take the actions. Hopefully there's a small percentage that get in touch and want some help. And then there's a whole lot of people that will just read it and we're never going to do anything anyway. The biggest problem I see with a manual is it would need to be very specific for a particular industry or a particular business, whereas the stories and principles can be applicable across lots of businesses. I can see how what you've done, Andre, for this particular client, you know exactly their situation, you can write it exactly for them. But to have something that's more general, that I see as a challenge.
And I agree. I definitely think it's difficult because so many projects are custom, right? It may be a call center, it might be a manufacturing plant, it might be a mine. And although we have some practices that are universal, obviously we're going to go do observations and watch to see how people work, to see where we think the bottleneck might be. So that's kind of universal, but coming up with a solution that demonstrates how to do that in a universal way is the
universal way. So if you want to make money out of this, figure out that there are 1,000 different types of people who could benefit from this, and there are some who really could massively benefit from it. And I'm going to call it Andre's book, and let's go. It's Andre's book for accountants, Andre's book for doctors, Andre's book for call centers, Andre's book, and just
like
write
the dummy series.
Yeah, and target it so that it helps people who actually have genuine pain. Actually, like you, just recently, if people like on LinkedIn, I went through a whole kind of strategizing session for myself over the last 3 months over called it a sabbatical, wrote that little Bottleneck book, and then I sat down and I worked through Alex Smith's strategy course, which you may have seen him on LinkedIn, but it's basically he's going, figure out what makes you different from everyone else, because you don't want to be better than them. You want to be different from them, because some people really value that difference. But then he says, but what you've got to do then is sacrifice all of the stuff that makes you just be the same as them. And I went through that, and I realized that I've often compared myself with agile coaches, which is not something I've done for, actually technically probably forever, but at least for 8-9 years. And I was sort of like in my mind comparing myself with them. And then I went through and I go, well, what do I actually do that's really, really different? And I used ChatGTP and the stuff in his course. And I actually started, well, I don't work with teams. I don't care about Kanban. Actually, I don't really even care about TOC all that much, apart from the fact that it's amazing. I don't care about Scrum. I don't care about SAFe. I don't do this. I work with managers, and most people can't do this. And I think projects are a really good idea. And then I looked at the end of that, and I suddenly had this horrible gulpy moment where I go, oh, Rolling Rocks Downhill, that was about delivering projects. And then I go, and I thought, wow, I shut up about that stuff because the whole agile space suddenly turned anti-project. And yet sometimes projects have been really good. So I thought, right, that's where I'm going to do it. And I put stuff on LinkedIn. And I swear I've had more people follow me and connect to me in the last week than I did in the last 6 months, because I actually put something out that resonated with some people. And there were a whole lot of people who don't care about what I care about, but there are some that do. So the reason I'm saying that is that I'd been quiet, assuming people didn't care about projects anymore, and not wanting to get cancelled because I said, actually, managers are quite good. Projects, sometimes, if you're going to make money from these things, they're really good. And I really have. I've just had so much positive going. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to read your book. So the reason I'm saying that to you is it's a concrete example of, you go, oh, no one cares about this. But there are some people who really care. You've already got one client who's wanted you to write this thing. I bet they're not the only person that wants that wants that thing. There might be variations on it. But the odds of you having to happen to have stumbled across one client who thought it was worth you doing this for them, they cannot be the only one.
No, I think you're right. And I think there's a space for that. I just was curious if you guys had cut the short path on that, realizing, because there's, in the consulting space, you sometimes have ex-McKinsey people that'll come out and they'll start their own thing. And then they think everybody wants to see presentation decks and all that kind of stuff. And then when they realize nobody wants that, they all want to be trained on how to pass the entrance exam, so to speak, to get in. They all want to do case studies to be able to get in. They don't want to see the product because they think it's unique to some situation, even though sometimes it can be used, the principles are the same, right? So I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't thinking that I had some great idea that could go down a certain road, and you guys have already tested all that and said, you want to be careful on that.
No. Honestly, the market has already sent you one signal.
I think also from my point of view, I enjoy telling stories. I love people seeing people have that light bulb moment, simplifying things down. That gets me really excited. The thought of writing a how-to manual, it doesn't do it for me. And it's just as well we're all different.
Totally.
No, because when I read your book, Graham, one of the things I thought about was in my mind, okay, how would I structure a project that did this, right? So that this guy could paint by numbers and get to the answer, so over 12 weeks or whatever the time frame was in the book, and that he wants to be able to go there, and he's fed as he's getting hungry for each next step, and in my mind, that's kind of how you want to be able to do it, because people sometimes, if they start to see that it's working, then they want to keep getting fed, right?
I like that. That's a good way. Keep getting fed. Hang on. I'm going to nick that. And in a few days, you will have all forgotten that Andre said that. And then they'll go, and then people go, wow,
Yeah,
that's a really good.
Shall I stop the recording quickly?
quick. Rewind.
Well, so much out there is universal to share, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about helping each other.